Hello, Amber here, and welcome to this companion tutorial and video overview for the Fizzy Lizzy cardigan and pullover patterns. These patterns have a slightly unusual construction in that they're knit sideways instead of top down or bottom up. So in this video, I will share an overview of the pattern, how it's constructed. I'll also talk about choosing the right size, some tips for success, and also include a couple of tutorials that will help you as you knit the project. This video doesn't include the pattern itself. That's available as a PDF from my Ravelry and Etsy stores. I'll add links to those in the show notes so you'll be able to find those easily. This video is chapterized. You'll be able to skip ahead to the parts that you're up to or that you need to know about, and it will include the overview, sizing, choosing your size, and techniques, which will include a provisional cast on, which is used at the underarms of the garment. Also explaining how to join the sleeve to the body. And there's also a little tutorial for the grafting, the stockingette, which happens at the front and back on the pullover, and just the back for the cardigan as it's open at the front. So let's get into it with an overview of the pattern. We've got two separate patterns, a cardigan and the pullover, and they're essentially both the same except for the front part. Otherwise, yeah, they're constructed in the same way and have the same gauge and measurements overall. Each pattern includes a choice between the cropped length, which we can see here, and a slightly longer regular length that just hits around the hip bone. So you can choose between the two lengths, the two styles, and 11 sizes. Each feature a deep hem, which is knit after the body, so you can make that as long or narrow as you like. I like mine quite deep. So the projects are worked in two halves, starting from the cuff, knitting a sleeve, knitting a little section for the underarm, and then joining the sleeve and underarm, and then it's knit back and forth across the front and back, across this mosaic section. Then at this point, the fronts and backs are separated and worked separately to the midpoint. There's some shaping for the neckline and a deeper neckline for the cardigan. The back is worked across to the center as well. So both the cardigan and the pullover are grafted together here. And then the pullover is grafted here while the cardigan keeps the front separate and the button bands worked later. With both projects, after the front right and left sides have been joined, then the hem is worked in the round for the pullover and worked back and forth flat for the cardigan. Then for the pullover, the collar is worked with the cardigan. Stitches are picked up for the button band and the button band is worked. And that's it. The samples have been knit with two colours. You could have fun with colour by changing up the ribbing. You could work black on this side and white on that side and a colour in the middle, or, you know, you can have fun in whichever way is appealing to you. Mosaic works best with strongly contrasting colours. As you can see here, I have quite light against quite dark. However, some of our testers knit less contrasting mosaic, and I have to say that looks amazing as well. So swatch it up if you're not sure and see how it looks in your swatch, and have fun with colours with this project. So a quick note about swatching. As you can see, I've swatched the mosaic to see how that looked. And this is the same yarn, just a different colour. Swatching to get my gauge. In my patterns, I only give the blocked gauge, and that's just because yarns can vary so much between their unblocked and blocked gauge. It's a really good idea to measure your unblocked gauge as well as your blocked gauge, so that you can have some information for while you're knitting your project that might help you change things a little bit along the way. For example, if you're working with a superwash yarn and it stretches a lot after blocking, you'll need to account for that if you're wanting to try on as you go to see how your sleeves are fitting, for example. If you want to make them longer or shorter, if you know that your project is going to grow with blocking, that's helpful information to have if you're trying on as you go. If you know it's going to be roughly the same, then that's helpful as well. So it's good to work out a bit of a percentage. If you work out the row gauge and the stitch gauge before blocking, and then work out how much that grows and approximately what sort of percentage of that it might be, like 5% or 10%, then you'll understand how much your project may grow or not grow when it's finished and you're blocking it. Because yarns behave so differently and people use different kinds of yarns for these projects, I only give the blocked gauge, which is the most important gauge for determining the finished size. So when it comes to choosing a size, this is the schematic and measurements for the pullover. The cardigan is very similar. The pattern allows for 2 to 4 inches of positive ease, which means slightly loose on, and you can vary that a little bit according to your taste. Like for me, for example, I'm a little bit in between sizes, so I chose to size down for a more fitted garment. If you're between sizes and you like it a little bit looser, you might size up. And also keep in mind there's already the built-in positive ease. So for example, to fit bust would be what your actual bust measurement is. And then the A bust measurement is the finished garment measurement. So the measurements given from A to J are what you can expect the finished garment to measure after blocking, and assuming that you got the right gauge as well. So size 1 to fit bust 30 inches has an actual measurement of 33.5, which gives, if your bust is 30 inches, 3.5 inches of positive ease. If you wanted more, you might size up. There's no size down in this case, but if you were somewhere in between the two, or for example, for me, I'm between 4 and 5, and I chose to size down for a more fitted garment. It's really helpful to measure against a garment that you already like wearing. So if you've got a jumper or cardigan that fits just the way you like it, then it's a good idea to measure that flat and take these measurements and compare them against the measurements given in the pattern, just to help you pick the size that's going to be the closest to your ideal size for this project. So you'll be able to get started. First of all, you'll work in your project in the round, knit the sleeve. As I mentioned before, the sleeve length is adjustable. You'll be knitting with increases up to a certain point, and then you'll be knitting even for a number of rows. So that's a good place to decide if you want to add or subtract any length for your arms. The rest of the project is fairly set. Once you cast on stitches down the side here, that will determine the length. However, there's a little bit of flexibility with the hem. You could make it a bit longer or shorter if you feel like you just want that little bit of extra length. The cast on I recommend in the pattern is Judy's Magic Cast On. It's a great cast on. It can be used for working in the round. For example, if you're starting toe-up socks, you could use this cast on for a seamless toe and then continue to work in the round. In this particular project, we will be working flat, so back and forth, working flat, not in the round. So be mindful of that you won't be knitting across all of the stitches initially. To work this cast on, you'll need a double length of yarn. Either double it over like this or pull an end from each inside and outside of your cake. If you do that, you'll need to create a little knot with enough of a tail to weave into the project later. I'm just using this loop to begin with. And one set of needles at the correct size for the pattern, looped and the needles held parallel. Loop that over the top needle and hold it in place with my thumb. I have a top strand, which is my working yarn, and then the bottom strand is my tail. And holding the two needles parallel, holding the top strand with my forefinger and the bottom strand with my thumb. Again, the top strand is connected to the ball of yarn, the working yarn. And I'll start with the bottom needle, and I will bring that needle up, over and under that top thread for one stitch cast on. And I already have a stitch cast on here from the beginning. Now I bring the top needle under that bottom yarn and allow that to come through for a second stitch cast on. Now the bottom needle over the top yarn again and through, and now I have 2 stitches cast on each needle. And I'll continue this process. So beginning with the top needle and the bottom yarn, the bottom needle and the top yarn. Keep adding stitches to the needles. It can get a little firm. I do like to keep it firm so it's nice and seamless when knitting it. We've got 5 stitches on each needle. So again, the top needle comes down under the bottom yarn. It's pretty straightforward. It's actually very easy, and you can get quite speedy with it. I tend to count as I go in lots of 10 usually, and I count the second stitch cast on. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. That's 11 on each needle. So I'll cast on a few more. 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5, 6, 6, 7, 7, 8, 8, 8, 9, 9. And so that will be 20 now. And that's enough for me. 20 on each needle. Then the first row is worked. So we bring the needles around to be able to work them. Bring this tail yarn under. Now trap it with the working yarn. Pull the bottom needle out, and with the working yarn, trapping the tail yarn, knit across the top row of stitches. So I've cast on the stitches, and the process of that cast on is actually counted as 2 rows in this project. This will count as a row and this will count as a row. So now we're knitting across one row of these stitches, one needle. So it's 3 rows now. And I'm going to turn the work to work on the wrong side. So now I'm going to purl back across and working flat, continue to purl and knit in stockingette. This tail's a bit long. Trim that. Now the stitches here will remain hurled until the joining the sleeve part. And these stitches, when I do come to them, will be twisted. I'm going to have to knit them through the back loop. But meanwhile, purl across for row 4, or the purl row. The instructions say cast on, then knit across, then purl across. And then rows 1 and 2 are indicated, and you'll knit those for the number of times for your size. And that will correspond to the number of underarm stitches that you have cast off for your size. Okay, so purled back across. So now this is equivalent to 4 rows. Turn the work so that I'm continuing in stockingette across these stitches. And continue to knit for the number of rows indicated. Okay, I've worked another 4 rows, which gives a total of 8 for this little mini underarm section. And next is potentially a little bit of a tricky bit. I think once you do it once, it'll become clear, but it's a bit fiddly. So essentially we have our sleeve and our body underarm. We want it ultimately to look like this, with the right sides all facing out. And what we'll be doing is knitting across the current working row that we've been working back and forth up here, and then joining it to the sleeve, and we'll actually be joining at the opposite end. So the rows in the round have been started here, working around, and then stitches were bound off, and that was the end of the row. This time we're going to actually work from this side of the row, or the round. Well, it's going to be a row now, we're turning it into a row. And that's slightly confusing, but essentially you just want to make sure that when you get to this point, both pieces are facing the right side out. So I will knit across the live working stitches. We've got the other cast on stitches that we have not worked yet. So the working yarn's attached here. I'll work 1 knit row up here. Now we are going to join. So knitting across these sleeve stitches. After this row, we'll be down to 1 set of needles again. So it's just a bit awkward for this little bit. Knit up to the top. I have my marker on the loose there. I'll just pop that back on. So that's for the top, the shoulder. And then bring those stitches around. Continue to work down. So all the stitches are off the sleeve needle and we just have one needle in process. And now we're going to work across the provisionally cast on stitches that we haven't worked yet, ensuring that both of the works are facing the right side out. And the needle's already set up in the right place for this anyway. That first loop stitch, a little bit tight, we'll knit that one. And then we're going to knit through the back loop of those cast on stitches that have not been worked yet. Okay, so we've now joined the sleeve and the body. It is a little bit tight, that curve where the sleeve is. You will need to either work a magic loop for the next while, the next front and back rows, or you could use a second set of circulars and have one set for one side and one set for the other. It depends on how you like to work. So now they're joined. This is the underarm gap that will be sewn at the end of the project as part of finishing. There's a little tail there that can be used for that. And now we're going to purl across the back stitches, and these will be the front, the right front. And continue to work back and forth across the back and front stitches as indicated in the pattern. There'll be some shoulder shaping to take note of, and in a little while you'll get to the mosaic part. So it's knit purl for the rest of the pattern at this stage until you get to the other arm. And I've just finished purling across. So it's starting to look a bit more like a garment. See, that's the side, the underarm that will be joined, the sleeve, and I'll continue to work back and forth across the front and back. Grafting stockingette. Here's a quick tutorial for grafting 2 stockingette pieces of knitting together seamlessly. In this example here, the Fizzy Lizzy pullover, the centre here has been grafted to join the 2 halves of the project together. And as you can see, it's quite a seamless join. You can't tell really where the knitting ends and starts. So a quick tutorial to demonstrate that. So we'll begin with our 2 pieces of knitting that we want to join together, and a tapestry needle, that's what you'll be using, and some scissors. Firstly, we'll need to cut off a length of yarn from the work that's long enough to graft the 2 pieces together. So estimating about 4 times the length of the work will be plenty there. Knit it long enough, but don't want it too long that it gets all tangly. The work on each needle, and it could be that both pieces are on one set of needles in a magic loop form, or we've got 2 sets of needles here. And we'll be working with the right side facing. So the wrong side will be down and the 2 right sides facing. And we will begin by threading that yarn onto the needle and by working some setup stitches. So it's quite a repetitive process, but the first 2 stitches set up for the rest of the grafting. I have the yarn attached to this front piece at this point, and the first setup stitch is to bring it purlwise through the front of the first stitch on the front needle, and then going to bring it knitwise through the first stitch on the second or back needle and pull that snug. And now we'll begin the 4-step process that will continue for the rest of the grafting. Step 1 is insert the needle through that first stitch on the first needle knitwise and take off the needle. So 1 stitch has been dropped. Now bring that needle back through what is now the first stitch purlwise and leave that on the needle. Now we come to the back needle and we're going to insert the needle, tapestry needle purlwise into that first stitch and take it off the needle. And now come to what is now the first stitch on the back needle and insert it knitwise and leave it on the needle. And we will continue those 4 steps. Insert knitwise, take off the needle, insert purlwise, leave on the needle. Insert purlwise, take off the needle, insert knitwise, leave on the needle. And you can see some stitches have been grafted together now. And continuing that stockingette pattern. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Knitwise and off the needle, purlwise and leave on the needle, purlwise off the needle, knitwise, leave on the needle. And it's good to just stop and keep stretching it out as you go so you can admire that magic, but also make sure the tension is nice and even. And continue knitwise and off the needle, purlwise, leave on the needle, purl and off, and knit. So you can start to turn the manoeuvres into one. So to make it a little bit faster. It's pretty rhythmic. Once you get into the zone, it happens quite readily. Just need to give yourself a bit of headspace and quiet to focus. And graft your knitting. And once you get to the final 2, just slip each one off. And done. Give it a little stretch out.